Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha, Gurureva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Chinmayam Vyapyat Sarvam Trailokyam Sacharacharam Tatpadam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Tvameva Mata Cha Pita Tvameva Bandhuscha Sakha Tvameva Vedyadravinam Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So we're still in our 6th chapter, the Yoga of Meditation. Let me get this box poked. Hopefully I will inadvertently sign off. There. Am I still online, everyone?
Yeah.
So what verse are we on?
42.
Verse 42 in the 6th chapter. So will you help us out, please, Deepa?
Sure. Atva yoginameva kule bhavati dhimatam etadhi durlabhataram loke janma yadi trisham. Or he is even born in the family of the wise yogis. Verily, a birth like this is very difficult to obtain in this world.
So the topic that we've been discussing, Arjuna asked Krishna, what if I commit myself to practice? I aspire to moksha, liberation, and I devote myself to practice as best I can. And I do not achieve self-realization in this lifetime. What happens? So unless you're an Egyptian, you can't take your stuff with you. We can't take our money with us. We can't take our property with us. We don't take the body with us. We don't take our relationships with us. We don't take our educational degrees with us. But we do take our yoga with us. Technically speaking, what happens is we have set up deep spiritual sanskaras, impressions, in the subtle body. So then we go to a particular loka, depends on your karma in this life, hang out there, resolving some unfinished business in this life, and then it is our desire that impels us back into the physical body again. And if the foremost desire of our heart is liberation, then we're impelled into an auspicious birth. The last verse we covered, you're born into a family with wealth and you get sanskars. Why? Well, we have to understand that for a poor person, God is bread. So if we are struggling in a life at the survival level, not likely we're going to be inspired to do yoga. Now, there are exceptions. Some of you may know Mata Amritanandamayi Amaji, they call it. She was a poor village girl from a fishing village in Kerala. Her awakening happened at a very early, very poor. But usually we need to have the time and the freedom to devote ourselves to this work. All of us are very lucky because we have been born into those kinds of families. Even better if we're born into a family where our parents are knowers of Brahman. So we are raised with these spiritual sanskaras, we're united with our yoga, then it takes place very quickly. So we think of someone like Ramana Maharshi, who attained enlightenment almost spontaneously at the age of 16. So what Gita is implying is, well, he got really close in a prior life, didn't quite make it. Just a little bit of dust left. Comes in very quickly. Change. Deep transformative in life. So this is to give us faith. If we're crappy yogis, I've been a crappy yogi in this life. One thing I have been good at is I've been consistent at it. I stay steadfast. I made so many mistakes. But if we're steadfast, time, realization dawns on the mind, if not in this lifetime, then in the next. Any thoughts on this? You don't have to start over. Have faith. I don't know about you, but when I met Swamiji and he started unfolding the scriptures, it wasn't so much as I was learning something new, but it's like, oh, of course. It's almost like, when you hear a song on the radio and you're going, I know that song, I know that artist, now what's their name? Anybody have that experience? You just can't quite bring the name to mind. It says, oh, that's Nat King Cole. You say, oh, of course. So many of us have that kind of an experience with this one. Any comments, any thoughts? All right, next verse.
Tatra tam buddhi samyogam labate parvadehikam yatate chatato bhuya samsiddhau kurunandana. There he comes to be united with the knowledge acquired in his former body and strives more than before for perfection, O son of the Kurus.
Yes. So our yoga comes with us. We're reunited with us. We find we're intuitively drawn to this work. We're karmically drawn to other people. Very soon, realization takes going on.
पूर्वाभ्यासेन तेनैव नीयते यवशोऽपि स जिज्ञासुर जिज्ञासुरपि योगस्य शब्दब्रह्माति वर्तते. By that very former practice, he is borne on in spite of himself. Even he who merely wishes to know yoga goes beyond the Shabda Brahman.
So Shabda Brahman means the sound of Brahman, means simply doing mantra. If what you want to do is have freedom, have moksha, it takes many lifetimes to even get that desire. I was working with someone this morning. We're making our way through a wonderful text that I have not read for 50 years. It's called Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism by Chogam Trungpa Rinpoche. Anybody read that one? It's a classic back in the 70s. Tibetan Lama, and he was one of the first to come out of Tibet and went to England and got degrees in literature. So he spoke English beautifully and wrote to the level of poetry. But he was talking about the 6 realms, and there's the human realm where we have discrimination. What's it all about? And then we strive and we get into the realm of the gods. Oh, my life is work and I've got money, I've got property, I've got love. But that's temporary. We start to drop from that, and then we get greedy, and then we drop into the realm of the hungry ghost because it isn't working, and we get angry, and then, or we get into super sensuous realms of thinking we know something special. We're studying yoga, but there's still that personal sense of self. As long as there's that personal sense of self, there's always a sense of bondage. And we just go back and forth in these 6 realms. They're psychological states, is what they are. But it's in the human realm where we begin to wonder, we ask questions, and we can investigate. So the Hindu scriptures say after it takes many lifetimes to get a human birth. That doesn't mean you were a lizard in your previous life. It means you were probably a 2-legged animal. After you got a human birth, it takes many, many lifetimes before we begin to ask the important questions. What's it all about? Even greater merit is it to come in contact with the true teaching. All sorts of harebrained teachings all over the planet. There are partial truths at best. You see on the television, prosperity gospel. We'll teach you how to pray so you can get rich. Knock yourself out. It won't ultimately satisfy the human heart. And to come in contact with a woman or a man of knowledge who themselves has gone beyond, then it happens very quickly. They can show you the awakened state. That kind of good merit, the punya, is achieved through 100 crores of lifetimes lived intelligently. How much is a crore? 100,000? 10,000? I can't remember.
Oh, 100,000.
100,000. Yeah, lots. So self-realization, Krishna will say, is easy to perform. It's not difficult, but it's incredibly rare. The main reason it's rare is nobody wants it. All right, next verse.
प्रयत्नाद्यतमानस्तु योगी संशुद्धि किल्बिषः अनेकजन्म संसिद्ध अस्ततो याति परां गतिम्. But the yogi who strives with assiduity, purified from sins and perfected gradually through many births, he then attains the highest goal.
So, what is my problem? Let's really address what is the cause of my bondage. Who remembers that? Very important point.
Avidya,
Yes. What is avidya?
ignorance.
Yes. Now, actions do not destroy ignorance because actions in and of themselves do not contradict it or conflict with it. So, if I'm thinking of an arithmetic problem, how many jumping jacks do you have to do to get the answer? How many times do you need to run around the block to do it? It's very simple what you need to do. Vinayak asked me what the arithmetic problem is.
What's the arithmetic problem?
5 plus 2 is 7. So what did you do? You inquired. The antidote to ignorance is knowledge. Knowledge is the fruit of vichara, investigation, of inquiry. Well, then why do the traditions give us all these practices? We've got the moral practices, the yamas and the yamas. We've got, suggestions to do yoga postures, asana. We've got pranayama, doing breathing exercises. We've got, Shankar will talk about becoming adhikari, a fit student. We want to develop these particular qualities of head and heart. Other scriptures say devotion is supreme. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and soul and mind and strength. Why do these various traditions enjoin these actions? It is because investigation into the nature of the self is only efficacious in a very pure and very subtle mind. Anybody here ever had any microscopic or laparoscopic surgery of any kind, where the docs use these scopes and they're just incredible what they can see inside the human body? You know how they do that? You can't do that precision kind of surgery if you're nearsighted and you're using a hatchet. Best you can do is chop the limb off, which is what they used to do 150 years ago. So in order to do something as subtle as discover my essential nature. I need a mind subtle and pure and disciplined. How much of these preparatory exercises do I need to do? Does it take 12 years? Does it take 2 years? Can't tell you. It depends on how gross the mind is and how solid our kleshas are. Klesha is a wonderful word. It means affliction. Our character issues. Some are more tenacious than others. Some were able to let go of easier than others. Any thoughts on this? In the basic meditation class, I will use the example of when you're cooking. So I love to cook. You know, I'm a foodie. So if you have a very ripe tomato and you want to make a salad, you want to slice the tomato, but you have a dull knife, what happens if you try to slice the tomato with a dull knife?
Squishes.
Squish. So what's the preparatory practice you need to do?
That's right, I died.
Or sharpen the knife. Sharpen the knife. You do that first. Then when you slice the tomato. But we have to understand the sharpening of the knife is a preparatory practice. You can sharpen and sharpen and sharpen and sharpen, and the tomato doesn't get sliced. Two different things. One is essential before you do the other. But sharpening alone will not cut the tomato. Likewise, our practices, our activities are important, but their purpose is to sharpen the wonder sword of knowledge. So on your way out tonight, if you go into the dining room and you look at the Tibetan painting that's against the wall by the window, you'll see the god, the Tibetan god Manjushri. So he's sitting there and he's got this sword over his head. He's not out there to hurt anybody. It's the wonder sword of knowledge, which allows us to discriminate, to cut away this from that. So that's the relationship between action and investigation. The actions sharpen the intellect, purify the mind, so that our investigation is fruitful. And a lot of us get confused. Oh, Jim, I'm purifying myself. I went from being a meat eater to now I'm a ovo-lacto vegetarian. Oh, that isn't working. I'm still having a hard time meditating. I'm going to give up eggs and dairy. That isn't working. I'm going to do radish threads only. You know, pure diet is helpful to purify the mind. But it's not about a pure diet. That in and of itself is knife sharpening. That's it. As with any other purification. Once the mind is pure, then what do? We want to be able to slow the flow of thought down enough so that we can see that a thought arises out of silence, continues to exist, and then merges back into silence before the next thought starts thoughting. For most of us, it's just this constant noise going on inside my head. I like to compare it to the sound of traffic. If you listen to the traffic here on, say, a weekday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when there's a lot of rush hour busy traffic, it's this constant sound. But I couldn't sleep, so I was up at about 3:30 this morning. I came in and I sat in meditation. Silence, and maybe one car would go by. The sound would arise and exist. When the mind has reached that slowness in the space between your thoughts, with the attentive faculty turned within, all our struggles cease. When all ambition is renounced. Koham, who am I? Chidananda Rupaham, Shivoham, Shivoham, Shankara says, I am of the form of bliss conscious. I'm not a person. I am Shiva, meaning the ground of being, auspiciousness itself. Then that's not theoretical. What we call paroksha jnana, indirect knowledge. It becomes aparoksha jnana, direct experience. Then there's a flash in the subtle intellect. Goes, oh, there's nothing there. I'm not a person. Never was. That sense of personness was like a very long and very vivid dream. This is when the buddhi, the intellect, becomes buddha. The prerequisite is a subtle and pure mind. How do we achieve it? Two things. Abhyasa, vairagyacha. Abhyasa, practice, meditate. And vairagya, mature dispassion. Mature dispassion is only accomplished through insight. I'm able to let go of my attachment to the world by thinking the desire through. Shankara calls it a steady observation of their effect. Oh, there's a bad boy. I love to get involved with the bad boys. How many times have you done it? Countless times. What happens? Wreckage and a heartbreak. Knock yourself out, you can do it again. Or you can think it through. Do I want to ride the roller coaster again? This is not a good choice. We do that with all the various aspects of our attachments. Any thoughts on this? Next verse.
तपस्वीभ्योऽधिको योगी ज्ञानीभ्योऽपि मतोऽधिकः कर्मिभ्यश्चाधिको योगी तस्माद् योगी भवार्जुन. The yogi is thought to be superior to the ascetics and even superior to the men of knowledge, mere scholars. He is also superior to men of action. Therefore, you strive to be a yogi, O Arjuna.
So there's a lot of stuff in here. Yoga means union. The question is, what gets united to what? Some people think, oh, I'm an individual person, I'm Jim, and I'm going to become united with God. What am I going to do? Get glued on to God? You already are that. Go back to the four great utterances, the Mahavakyas of the Upanishads. First one, Prajnanam Brahma. Brahman, ultimate reality, is consciousness. Second one, I am Atma Brahma. This self is Brahman. Oh, Guruji, your self is Brahman, I'm a worm. No. Tat Twamasi. You are. It sure doesn't seem like it. Do what Krishna has suggested in this chapter. Come to realize, oh, I'm not a person. That was an illusion. That was a superimposition. Not only am I Brahman now, but I've always been it. I just didn't know it. So the fourth Mahavakya is not, I know Brahman. It's Aham Brahmasmi. I am. I didn't become it. I realized I've always been it. So what happens? What gets yoked to what? It is the mind that gets yoked to the self. So for the woman or the man of wisdom, the mind no longer extroverts into the world. It no longer posits a personal sense of self. It no longer conceives of a world of name and form that's separate from me, and the happiness and the misery is out there. And then I got to struggle to get it. Kartavya, obligatory action. That's love. Santoshada. Content. Paramashanti. Supreme. All right, next verse.
योगिनामपि सर्वेषां मद्गतेनान्तरात्मना श्रद्धावान् भजते यो मां समे युक्ततमो मतः. And among all yogis, he who, full of faith, with his inner self merged in me, worships me, is according to me the most devout.
So, how do I worship Krishna? Remember, there's the dualistic understanding of worshiping Krishna. There's the God Krishna out there. I love you. But that's again a preliminary practice. Understand when Krishna says me, he's speaking in a full state of yoga. He's talking about the self in everyone and everything. So the highest form of prema, love, devotion, is Atma Ramana, reveling in himself. Man or woman of wisdom, their mind deeply absorbed in self-nature. And Shankara talks about the ideal teacher. He says, who's a full knower of the Supreme, who has retired into the Supreme. And if you want to follow this idea of self-abidance, reveling in the self is the highest form of worship, I would recommend the text Narada Bhakti Sutra. Who here studied that? We'll have to do that. We haven't done it in quite a while. The ultimate text on love, where the Bhakti tradition and the Jnana tradition come together. Beautiful, beautiful. Any thoughts on this? Next verse.
That's the end.
And there's a little Upanishad at the end.
Yeah. Om Tatsaditi Srimad Bhagwad Gita Supanishatsu Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre Shri Krishnarjun Samvade Atma Samyam Yogo Nam Shashtodhyayaha. Thus, in the Upanishads of the glorious Bhagwad Gita, in the science of the eternal, in the scripture of yoga, in the dialogue between Sri Krishna and Arjuna, the sixth discourse ends entitled the Yoga of Meditation.
Yes. Does he call it Abhyas Yoga?
Atma Samyam Yoga.
Okay, he uses a little different title. Yeah. The Yoga of Meditation. All right, so now we're going to plunge right away into the 7th chapter. Now, some commentators divide Gita into 3 sections of 6 chapters each, which correspond to that 3rd Mahavakya, Tattvamasi. Tattvamasi means thou art that, or that thou art. Tat means that, tvam means you. Asi is the verb to be. So the way it's sometimes looked at is the first 6 chapters are about you. Starting with the 7th, you have 6 chapters about that. So let's see what Krishna has to say about that. Now again, let's review the 3 levels that Krishna is going to teach on throughout the whole Gita. At one level is what we call the Dharma Shastra. It gives us actions to do. Dharma means the path, the law, the things to be done. For those who are identified with the body. Then we can study Gita identified with Arjuna. He is the spiritual every person. And we acquire qualities of head and heart. Basically for those who are identified with the subtle body. Then we can study Gita identified with Krishna, always keeping in mind whatever Krishna says about himself, he is saying about the self in you. So let's plunge right away into the 7th chapter.
Shri Bhagwan Vacha Maya Saktamana Partha Yogam Yunjanmadashrayah Asamshayam Samagrammam Yatha Gyasyasi Tachrunu. The Blessed Lord said, with the mind intent on me, Partha, practicing yoga and taking refuge in me, how thou shalt, without doubt, know me fully. That do thou hear.
So, with this Abhyasa yoga that we've had in the 6th chapter, karma yoga that's preceded that, the assumption is by now, the mind of the yogi has gotten pure. One other thing in the prior chapter that I forgot to mention. So, if you need to identify with some personal sense of self, what identity should I take on? Do I take on the identity of mother or worker at my job or son or daughter or this culture or this nationality? Krishna says, no. Take on the ego state of being a yogi. Another way of saying being a mumukshu, a seeker after liberation. Sadhaka, student, seeker. That's what I am. That's what my life is about. So now, assuming we've gained a degree of purity of head and heart, now Krishna says, I'm going to impart this knowledge of the infinite to you. Now you're subtle enough to receive. Next verse.
Jnanam teham savikyana midam vakshanmaya midam vakshamya sheshatah yajkyatvaneha bhuyonya ajkyatavya mavishashyate. I shall declare to thee in full this knowledge combined with realization, which being known, nothing more here remains to be known.
So here Krishna uses these 2 words, jnanam and vijnanam. Here, Swamiji translates it as knowledge. And did he say experience or realization, wisdom? What? How did he read that part again? The two. Vijnanam,
Jnanam, so Vijnanam,
But what's the English he uses?
knowledge and realization.
Knowledge and realization. Okay. So, what do we mean by this and why is it necessary? The two are important. First, we get what's called the indirect knowledge. Other scriptures will call it paroksha jnana, indirect knowledge, which is the theoretical understanding. Then comes the vijnanam. V is a superlative. What is beyond understanding? What is beyond just book learning? Direct experience. Aparoksha. God. Let me tell you why. We talked a little earlier about samadhi, that state of mind of no mind, when the thoughting has ceased and the attentive faculty is turned within. Actually, all of us have fleeting samadhis all the time. You might call it spacing out, where the mind just goes. But it does nothing to free us. Why? First, we don't pay attention to it when it happens. Second, we don't have a theoretical framework to be able to introvert the attentive faculty and to notice what's going on. Example I like to use is it's 4:30 in the afternoon and you're on the BART train and there's somebody holding on to the pole at the top and they're looking at the BART seat in front of them and they're tired and their mind just goes. Then their mind comes back. And you know what they realized? Back of BART seat. It does nothing to free. So we need not only the experience of the ending of the mind, but we need the theoretical understanding of how to see what's really going on. True story. So I have a friend who was a student of Ram Dass. And one time he was telling me about doing drishtipat with Ram Dass. This is when you sit facing one another and look into each other's eyes. Stephanie, is there a psychological term for that? There must be.
Like, I mean, mirroring? What are we just
Like
looking?
primal gazing with a child, where you look into each other's eyes.
So,
You get really high when you do it. And what happened to this person is he started to see faces and he didn't know if it was gods or past incarnations or stuff like that. His mind was starting to move away from its fixation on this plane of name and form. But what he didn't do is use that Shakti to look within. Who is seeing all these faces? Drop all that stuff. See if you can notice Who am I? So here in Vedanta Satsang, what we're doing here, this is what's called a Shabda Pramana. It's a means of knowledge through words, through sound, but it's more than that. Ideally, you get your mind tuned up. And then we invite you to introvert this attentive faculty using the Shakti that's in you, which helps quieten the mind. And then we point out, we tell you what you're experiencing while you're experiencing it. And many of you during satsang will have these ahas. Oh, yeah, I see it. Not a person, and that grounded being, and that space of joy. At the beginning, it may be hard to hold on to. Swamiji used to say, yes, the students leave the Vedanta on their seats and then they leave. It's hard for us to hold on to it. By the time we get to the car, I'm a person again. I need to do that, and how could you do this to me? And I have this problem. I me, mine, I me, mine, I me, mine. That awareness of myself. So we do this over and over. So just reading books, just watching YouTube videos is at best some intellectual comfort for the scholar. Jnana. It's a value. But when that deep understanding is combined with direct experience, vijnana, then something marvelous takes place. So this is what Krishna is implying. In Yoga Vasishta, how are we doing about time? We're fine. There's a wonderful story about Prahlada. Anybody know who Prahlada is? He's, in many stories, the king of the demons. So in the eternal war between the asuras, the demons, and the devas, the demigods, they're always fighting. Good and evil going on in heaven. So Prahlad says, I'm going to end this forever. So he has great siddhis, great powers. So he creates 3 super demons. And they are realized. They have no ego. Because they had no ego, they had no fear. They go into battle against the devas and they're whooping butt. The devas, what are we gonna do? So they run off to heaven and they talk to Brahma, the creator. What do? We're just getting our asses handed to us. Brahma says, this is your strategy. Engage in battle with them and then feign retreat. And do it over and over again. So the devas go, you've beaten us, we're going to run away. They do it again and again. And the super demons then engage in chintya. Chintya in Hindi means worry. In Sanskrit, it means after the fact rumination over an experience. You're not in the now. You're not here now, you're there then. So the Terminator demons go, look at how powerful we are. We just cleaned their clocks. Aren't we fantastic? As soon as they engaged in the chintya, ego formed. And as soon as ego formed, they had fear. And as soon as they had fear, the devas could wipe them out. So Prahlada goes, I know what I'm going to do now. So he creates Terminator 2. 3 more super demons who not only were without ego, but they were Shrotriya, meaning they knew the scriptures, so they had the tools to keep ego from forming. Let me give you a worldly example. So someone says to you, oh, you're so wonderful. Yogi goes, don't believe a word of it, Jim, let it go. How could you do that? You're a terrible person. Drop it, Jim. What are you? You are that perfect ground of being. Yeah. Using the tools. So the Devas tried their same strategy. Engaged in battle, ran away. Engaged in battle, ran away. Engaged in battle, ran away. Didn't work. Could not defeat the super demons. So they go back off to heaven and they go to Vishnu. What are we going to do? Vishnu says, you can't do a thing. I'm going to have to deal with this. So he comes down, takes his discus, kills them. And because they were without ego, they had jnanam and vijnanam. They were realized demons. They were liberated. It's a wonderful story. But the point here is we need both. Understanding jnana coupled with direct experience. Any thoughts on this? All right, next verse.
Manushyanam sahasreshu kaschityati siddhaye yatataamapi siddhanam kaschinmam veti tattvataha. Among thousands of men, one perchance strives for perfection. Even among those successful strivers, only one perchance knows me in essence.
So, as I was saying before, how many people even strive for self-realization, for moksha, freedom? The vast majority of people don't even know it exists. Now, in Indian culture, there is a cultural impediment which non-Indians don't have to deal with. There is such a reverence for self-realization that many people think, oh, great Mahatma, great saint. Not for me. I'm just a vulgar, ordinary person. Maybe next lifetime. I'll go to the temple, hire a pujari to do a puja. Have you seen that? Yes?
Yeah.
Couldn't happen to me. So our very love, awe, and respect for self-realization itself becomes a barrier. Those of us in the West, we don't know it's hard. We don't know it's that rare. Why not? You know? So for people in the West, frequently, you don't have to deal with that cultural problem. Very, very interesting. Except in the West, because of our materialism, we have this incredible attachment to the world. Swamiji used to say that India is importing from the West the worst of the West. Its vulgarity, its materialism, and it's exporting its best, its spiritual culture. He said, one of these days, you're going to have to go to a Westerner and learn your own tradition from Swami Bill or Swami Steve. Then many of us who even know that it's possible, that it's there, when we learn the price tag, in order to have a mind that will abide absorbed in the self easily, freely, we must give up our attachment to the world and give up every personal sense of self. Everything that we've been identified with, held as valuable and sacred, we have to let go. Now, probably the greatest worldly example I have for that I can share from is when I'm working with people just before they decide to get sober. And frequently the mindset will be, if you had my problems, you drink too. It's the only friend I have left. Not knowing that the very attachment, the very addiction is what's causing the misery. They come in contact with recovery and they hear, it's so much better if you put the plug in the jug. Abstinence, stop drinking. Can't I just cut back? Not going to work. I'm not ready for that yet. So many times. So we say, okay, we'll gladly refund your misery. Go experiment some more. Until you get sick and tired of being sick and tired. Then we get beaten into reasonableness. The same process happens for most of us. When living an extroverted life, finally we are woke enough to see this isn't working. We tried getting the trophy husband or the trophy wife and the red sports car, and it didn't work. It's just different. then the mind can seriously begin to pursue the spiritual life. Then I find, oh my God, I'm so burdened by all these desires, all these compulsions, all these reactions. I can't do this. So we don't have staying power. We're not steadfast. So rare is the person not only strives for it, but is steadfast. Next verse.
भूमिरापो नरो वायुः खं मनो बुद्धिरेव च अहंकार इति यं मे भिन्ना प्रकृतिरष्टधा. Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intellect, egoism. These are my eightfold Prakriti.
So now he's going to go into what we call Prakriti. Prakriti means nature. And this is a term that is borrowed from Sankhya philosophy. Sankhya philosophy is an older tradition than the Vedanta, and it's inherently dualistic. Just a quick thumbnail of their view of how it works is each one of us is what we call a Purusha, which is an independent, individual kind of little globule of consciousness, which has qualities. It has will, it has attentive faculties. And my problem is this Purusha is all entangled in the stuff of nature, the natural world, Prakriti. Sankhya philosophy, the idea is get the Purusha out of the Prakriti. The problem is it tends to devolve into mortification of the flesh. Let me beat up the body, and that's going to get me out. It's not very successful. Real yoga, here Krishna will use, or Vyasa, our poet, will use the language of the Sankhya's, but with a different meaning. So let's start with the first dimension. Earth, air, fire, water, and akasha is the word in Sanskrit. Sometimes translated as ether, sometimes translated as space. I struggled with this when I was first studying Gita. I was, what do you mean? These are not elements. Iron is an element. Helium is an element. Oxygen is an element. Earth is not an element. Air is not an element. And what the ancients were talking about was not the physical composition of the phenomenal world as we understand it. It all has to do with the Vedantic, the yogic understanding of perception itself. The example I like to give is this. So here in my living room, you could see the coffee table. What's the coffee table made of?
Wood,
What's wood made of?
carbon.
Yeah. So you can knock your foot against the coffee table, you can knock your knuckles on it. If I polished it with some lemon oil, you could smell the lemon oil. You sensually perceive the coffee table. Now, if you dream that you're in my living room and you see my dream coffee table, what is the dream coffee table made of? made of wood? Well, in the dream, it seems like wood. But what it actually is seeability, hearability, touchability, smellability, feelability. Earth is the symbolic representation of smellability. Got to think in terms of an agrarian society, of freshly tilled earth. Air is touchability. Fire is seeability. Water is tasteability. And space is hearability. Now, listen carefully. Just as the coffee table in my dream is a combination of those 5 sense perceptions, which make the appearance of what appears to be a solid coffee table. Yoga says, actually, the coffee table in the waking state here in my living room is no different. It's come about by what we call the Panchakaranam, the fivefold division and subsequent recombination. Basically, what he's saying is it's just a grosser vibration. That's all it is. Yoga thunders. The phenomenal world is not created. It's not material. It's not concrete. It's not separate from me. It comes about by means of imagination. And the quantum physicists are getting so close to it. So, for example, the experiments they did with light, if you do not observe and measure it, behaves like a wave. If you start to measure it, if you observe it, it behaves like mass with photons. The act of knowing it makes it matter. I'm not making this up. I'm making this up. It's so close to the Vedanta. Further studies are talking about, well, there's nothing that's really there. It's just the probability of stuff. That consciousness of things is what makes them appear as they are. So when Gita here talks about these 5 elements, earth, air, fire, water, and ether, it's this deep understanding of what the phenomenal world is and what comprises it. So there was earth, air, fire, water, and ether, then there was mind, was that right?
Mind, intellect, and egoism.
Yes. Mind, which is where feeling happens, where judgment happens. We will often say the mind is the world and the world is the mind. It's my interpretation, my stories that make the world what it is for me. Intellect, this is where thought happens. It's also where we determine the thatness of something. How do I know it's a table? I've been taught that it's a table. That's just an idea, and that's cultural. In the EST program, Werner used to say, if for an Australian Aborigine, it's not a table, it's firewood. If it's growing in the ground, it's a tree. If it's dead and it's on the ground, it's firewood. They have no idea, no concept of a table. So it's the intellect that determines the thatness, the suchness of things. And then lodged in the intellect is this ahankara, this egoism, where I attribute to the self the qualities of the not self, where I think I'm the body, where I think I'm my feelings, where I think I'm my thoughts, where I think I'm my stories. Sometimes called the karta, which means the doer. It's the sense of agency. I do this, I do that. And it's not evil. Couldn't function in the world without it. It's just not me. So Krishna says this is the eightfold, 5 elements, mind, intellect, egoism, that comprise what it means. This is our spiritual anthropology. Okay, we went a little late tonight. I wanted to get through this verse, then we'll expand on this next week. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Sri Guru Pyo Namaha. Hari Om.